Ben Thompson had never really imagined himself in the kind of neighborhood with matching mailboxes and a newsletter called the Maple Hollow Monthly. But when the job offer came through and the house checked every box including the fenced backyard for Milo, it felt like the right move. Quiet, clean, and close to the city. He didn't think much about the Homeowners Association. In fact, he didn't think about it at all. That first morning in Maple Hollow was golden. The sun poured through the trees, Milo galloped across the yard with his favorite stuffed fox, and Ben sipped his coffee on the porch, feeling like he'd finally landed somewhere steady. Milo barked just once as a kid on a scooter passed by, and the kid smiled and waved. Ben waved back. It was shaping up to be a perfect start. By afternoon, the last of the moving boxes were out of the truck. A few neighbors had already popped by to introduce themselves. There was Cheryl from 2 houses down who handed him a mason jar of homemade lemonade. And Mr. Patel, who lived across the street and gave Milo a gentle pat on the head. Everyone seemed friendly, least at first. Just as Ben was brushing the dust off his hands and thinking about dinner, he spotted something sitting on the doormat. It was a crisp sheet of paper, folded once with his name typed in neat block letters on the front. He opened it slowly. "Welcome to Maple Hollow," it began so far. So good. Then came the next paragraph. In order to maintain a harmonious environment for all residents, we ask that homeowners observe our pet guidelines. Dogs of a certain size may not be compatible with the shared vision for the neighborhood. Thank you for your understanding. Ben raised an eyebrow. At the bottom, it was signed, Nancy Grigsby, Chairperson, Maple Hollow Association. He turned the letter over. A number. Contact info. No specifics. Just that vague wording of a certain size. Ben glanced at Milo, who was now stretched out under the porch swing, snoring lightly with one paw twitching in a dream. Not compatible, Ben said aloud. You hear that, buddy? Milo responded with a soft snort and rolled over. Ben folded the letter back up and slipped it into his jacket pocket. It didn't make him angry, exactly, but it stayed with him like a loose thread you keep noticing, even if you try not to tug at it. He wondered who Nancy Grigsby was and what exactly she thought Milo might do. Steal picnic baskets, topple trash cans, start a one-dog jazz band at midnight. Later that evening, after Milo's walk and a grilled cheese dinner, Ben did a little online digging. Maple Hollow had a resident portal, nothing fancy, just a few announcements and a PDF copy of the handbook. He clicked through it slowly, scrolling past block party reminders and spring flower photos, until he found Nancy's name again. She was, indeed, the chairperson, had been for 6 years. One of the original homeowners, according to a newsletter article titled Our Founding Neighbors. There was even a picture of her beside a ceremonial tree, smiling in a windbreaker and holding a small golden shovel. Ben closed his laptop and looked at Milo, who had now taken over half the couch. Well, he said, I guess we just met the queen. He didn't have a plan yet. But something told him that Milo wasn't going anywhere, that this was only the beginning. The next morning, Ben woke up determined not to let the letter weigh on him. Still, it was hard to enjoy his coffee knowing there was a silent judgment. Floating around the neighborhood, he figured the best thing to do was introduce himself. Maybe this Nancy Grigsby just needed to meet Milo in person. No dog lover could resist his golden eyes and permanent smile. After Milo's morning walk, Ben swapped his hoodie for a clean button-down and headed out. He didn't have to ask where Nancy lived. Cheryl had pointed it out during her lemonade. Drop off. 3rd house on the right, she's the one with the topiary swans. Don't touch them. Seriously? Ben made his way down the sidewalk, Milo padding beside him. As they approached the house, he spotted the swans' 2 perfectly trimmed bushes, shaped into birds, beaks facing the street like little leafy guards. The lawn was a vivid emerald, trimmed to uniform height, and the flag by the door had a seasonal design. A smiling sun wearing sunglasses. He rang the doorbell. No sound, just a flashing blue ring that glowed under his finger. He waited. Behind the blinds, something shifted. After a few seconds, the door creaked open. A woman in her late 50s stood there wearing a white visor, crisp polo shirt, and a pair of running shoes that had never met mud. She looked from Ben to Milo, then back again. "Good morning," Ben said, flashing his best neighborly smile. "I'm Ben Thompson. Just moved in on Mapleview Court. Thought I'd stop by and say hello." Her eyes flicked once more to Milo, then settled back on Ben. "Yes, I know." There was a long pause. "I got your letter," he continued, keeping his tone light. "Wanted to make sure we got off on the right foot." Nancy gave a tight smile. "That's very thoughtful of you." Ben gestured to Milo, who was now sitting politely at his feet. "This is Milo. He's friendly, gentle, fully trained, loves kids, and naps." Nancy didn't look down. "He's quite large, bigger heart than body," Ben offered. "He thinks he's the size of a throw pillow." Nancy didn't laugh. She stepped halfway out the door and gently pulled it closed behind her. "I'm sure he's lovely," she said. "But the association has always emphasized balance, peace. We try to keep things ... manageable." "Understandable," Ben said, still smiling. "I did read through the guidelines last night. It's very thorough." Her eyebrows lifted a fraction. "Then you know we've had issues in the past, blocking damage to common areas. It only takes one bad apple." Ben nodded. "Absolutely. But I think if you give Milo a chance, you'll see he's more like a golden apple. Soft, sweet, and generally asleep by 9. Nancy gave the smallest of chuckles, more breath in sound, but her arms stayed crossed. "Well," Shay said, glancing up the street, "I hope you find your time in Maple Hollow comfortable." "That's the plan," Ben said. "And if there's ever anything I can do to help out around the neighborhood, just let me know." She nodded once, offered a faint smile, and stepped back inside. The door closed with a gentle click. Ben stood on the porch for a second, then looked at Milo. Well, that could have gone worse. Milo wagged his tail like he agreed. As they walked back home, Ben replayed the conversation in his head. Nancy hadn't said anything directly against Milo. She hadn't said much at all, really. But there was something in the way she spoke, like every word was measured, counted, and kept in a ledger. She might not have raised her voice, but she hadn't opened the door either. Ben patted Milo on the head. "Guess we'll just have to win her over the long way." He didn't know it yet, but that walk to Nancy's door had just set something in motion. Something bigger than topiary swans and sunshine flags. The neighborhood had rules, but it also had loopholes. And Ben was getting very good at reading between the lines. That night, after Milo had settled into his favorite spot on the couch, Ben pulled out the Maple Hollow handbook again. The pages were slightly worn where he'd flipped through them earlier, but this time he was determined to dig deeper. The letter from Nancy. The polite but firm visit everything nudged him toward understanding just how Maple Hollow ticked, with the house quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Ben spread the handbook on the coffee table and started reading every word carefully. There were sections on lawn maintenance, guidelines about holiday decorations, parking regulations, and even the hours when lawnmowers were permitted to run. But nothing about dogs, at least, not directly. He flipped through the table of contents again and stopped at a chapter titled Shared Spaces and Resident Projects. Curious, he scanned the paragraphs. Spoke about common areas within the neighborhood, doping green spaces, unused lots, places where residents could propose improvements or additions if they gathered enough support from neighbors and received approval from the board. One sentence caught his eye. Areas zoned for community use may include recreational spaces for children and pets, pending a majority approval from the Homeowners Board, and supporting signatures representing no less than 20% of the neighborhood households. Ben leaned back in his chair, Milo's head popping up from the couch as if sensing something important. Community spaces, Ben murmured, tapping the page. He thought about the empty lot just beside Nancy's house, overgrown with weeds and forgotten trees, clearly ignored for years. He remembered how perfect it looked for a small park, fenced and friendly. A place where Milo could roam freely, and where neighbors could gather without stepping on each other's toes. An idea. Spark. Could he suggest creating a dedicated dog park in that space? A safe, fenced area where dogs could play off-leash. It was a win-win. Milo would have room to run, and the rest of the neighborhood would have a shared place for their furry friends, too. Ben smiled. If it worked, it would be impossible for anyone to say that dogs didn't belong, because here they'd have their own spot. And since the lot was right next to Nancy's house, well, that was the sort of twist that made suburban life interesting. The next day, Ben visited the town hall's planning department to check the lot's zoning details. The clerk confirmed it was classified as common area, exactly what the handbook had said. With a little paperwork and community support, turning it into a dog park wasn't just possible, it was encouraged. That afternoon, Ben sat down with his laptop and started drafting a simple proposal. He pictured the park fenced with white pickets, a little water fountain for dogs, benches for owners, and maybe even some agility equipment. He imagined kids laughing, dogs chasing balls, and neighbors chatting, turning that empty patch of land into a lively spot for everyone. But he also knew the uphill battle it could be. He had to gather signatures, at least 20% of the neighborhood. He had to convince the board, including Nancy. That last part made him pause. Nancy had been firm from the start, and Ben wasn't sure she'd be on board with any plan involving Milo or dogs in general. Still, the idea gave him hope. He looked down at Milo, now dozing with his head resting on the armrest. "Ready to help me make this neighborhood a little better?" Ben asked. Milo's tail thumped the couch in response. Ben spent the rest of the evening typing up flyers and drafting a petition. He kept the message simple: a safe, welcoming space for dogs and their people to gather, a place for neighbors to connect before bed. He printed out a few copies and tucked them into his jacket pocket, ready for the next day's walk. The following morning, Ben and Milo set off down the street, the petition in hand and donuts in the other. Maple Hollow was quiet, but the early sun warmed the sidewalks and made the dew glisten on the lawns. Ben felt lighter, like he was doing something meaningful. Every door they approached was an opportunity to share the idea. Some neighbors smiled, immediately excited by the chance for a dog park. Others were curious but hesitant, wanting to hear more. A few didn't answer, but that was expected by the time they reached Cheryl's house. Ben already had 3 signatures and a handful of positive nods. Cheryl grinned as she signed. Finally, a place for the dogs to run. This will be great for the kids, too. Ben smiled, energized by the support. Maybe Nancy wouldn't have the last word after all. The next morning, Ben was up early, Milo bouncing excitedly by his side. He tucked the petition folder under his arm, grabbed a box of fresh donuts from the bakery down the street, and headed out for another round of canvassing. The neighborhood was beginning to feel more like home, and this mission gave him a purpose beyond unpacking boxes. As they strolled along Maple Hollow Lane, Ben glanced around. Neat lawns stretched out on either side, flower beds bursting with color, and mailboxes lined up like sentinels. The sun was soft but bright, and the air smelled faintly of freshly mown grass and brewing coffee. Their first stop was Cheryl's porch, where a group of kids had already gathered to play. Milo's tail wagged furiously as he approached, instantly becoming the center of attention. Kids laughed, reaching out to pet him, and Ben smiled, handing out donuts like they were magic tokens. "Hey, Cheryl," Ben called out. "Got a minute?" Cheryl wiped her hands on her apron and stepped closer. Ben pulled out the petition and explained his idea for a dog park. It's a space where dogs can run free and neighbors can meet up. What do you think? Eyes lit up. That sounds wonderful. I've seen too many dogs cooped up indoors or stuck on leashes. The kids would love a place like that too. She didn't hesitate. Count me in. With a quick signature, the petition grew. Milo barked happily, as if approving every name. Ben moved on, visiting homes and catching neighbors as they watered their gardens or checked the mail. Some were curious and eager. Others were cautious but polite. At Mr. Patel's house across the street, Ben was met with a warm smile. "Milo is becoming quite the neighborhood celebrity," Mr. Patel chuckled. "I think this dog park idea will be good for everyone." He signed without hesitation. The morning rolled into early afternoon, and with every signature, Ben's confidence grew. People began sharing their own stories about their pets, about missing spots to gather, about wanting a more connected neighborhood. Several residents offered to help with fundraising or organizing cleanup days. By the time Ben reached the community mailbox, his petition folder was thicker and his box of donuts almost empty. Milo, now tired but happy, plopped down on the sidewalk with a satisfied sigh. Ben looked around and noticed a few neighbors chatting near the corner park. He approached them, sharing the idea and asking if they'd be interested in signing. Few exchanged glances but ultimately added their names. Most importantly, Ben spotted a young couple who'd moved in just last month, both smiling warmly. "This sounds like a great idea," the woman said. "We've been wishing for a place where our new puppy could run safely." That night, back at home, Ben organized the signatures and drafted a short letter to the association attaching the petition. He kept it simple and friendly. "We, the undersigned, believe a dog park in the unused lot beside Nancy's home would enrich our neighborhood and provide a safe, welcoming place for dogs and residents alike." Milo lay curled at his feet, as if waiting for the next step. Ben couldn't help but feel a small thrill. The ball was rolling and momentum was on their side. Over the following days, Ben continued knocking on doors, bringing Milo along like a furry ambassador. Some neighbors stopped him in the street, eager to add their names. Others called with questions or offered ideas for the park's design. Even the kids started drawing dog park signs with colorful markers and posting them on their windows. Word spread quickly. The idea wasn't just a petition anymore, it was becoming a neighborhood movement. At the next homeowners meeting, Ben planned to present the proposal himself. He had rehearsed what he'd say, focusing on community, connection, and the simple joy of giving dogs a place to be dogs. There was still one hurdle. Nancy. Ben knew she was likely to oppose the idea. But with so many neighbors behind him, he hoped reason and enthusiasm would carry the day. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Ben sat on his porch with Milo. Feeling the cool breeze and the quiet hum of Maple Hollow settling in for the night, he took a deep breath and smiled. "We're almost there, buddy. It's just a little more." Milo's tail thumped in agreement. The evening of the Maple Hollow Association meeting arrived with a gentle buzz in the air. Ben felt a mixture of nerves and excitement as he stepped into the clubhouse, clutching his folder of petitions and notes. Milo was home, curled up peacefully. But Ben could almost hear his dog's eager energy echoing inside him. The room was filled with neighbors. Some faces were familiar and friendly, others more reserved, all gathered around tables set in neat rows. Nancy Grigsby sat near the front, clipboard in hand, her posture as composed as ever. The soft hum of whispered conversations filled the space as people waited for the meeting to begin. Ben took a deep breath and found a seat near the middle. He watched Nancy as she shuffled papers and exchanged polite nods with other board members. It was clear she was paying close attention to the turnout. Finally, the meeting chair called the room to order and began with the usual updates: budget numbers, landscaping plans, upcoming social events. Then it was time for new proposals. Ben's heart quickened. When his name was called, he stood, smoothing his shirt and stepping to the front. The room quieted. "Good evening, everyone," he began, voice steady. "I'm Ben Thompson, and as many of you know, I'm new to Maple Hollow. My dog Milo and I have really enjoyed meeting neighbors and settling in. But one thing we noticed was the lack of a dedicated space for dogs to play safely and for residents to gather." Ben flipped through his folder, showing the petition. "We've gathered signatures from over 25% of our neighborhood, expressing support for transforming the unused lot next to Nancy's home into a community dog park. He paused, letting the words sink in. This space could be a place where dogs run off leash, kids can play safely, and neighbors connect over something we all share, a love of this community. There were nods and murmurs of agreement. Glanced at Nancy, who watched him with a neutral expression. Creating a dog park isn't just about the dogs, he continued. It's about bringing people together, encouraging healthy outdoor activity, and adding value to our neighborhood. It's a small project with the potential for a big impact. When he finished, the room burst into polite applause. Several residents spoke up in support, sharing their own stories of how a dog park would benefit them. Then came Nancy's turn. She stood slowly, clearing her throat. I appreciate Mr. Thompson's enthusiasm and the signatures he has collected. However, I must remind everyone that the association's goal has always been to maintain a certain balance and peace in our neighborhood. Her voice was calm but firm. Adding a dog park so close to my home raises concerns about noise, safety, and maintenance. We must consider the impact on all residents, not just those with pets. Ben nodded, expecting her response. I understand those concerns, he said. That's why the proposal includes plans for fencing, regular cleaning schedules, and hours of operation designed to minimize disturbances. Nancy looked around the room. The association must weigh all factors carefully. It's not just about popularity. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then the chair opened the floor for discussion. Neighbors spoke, some voicing enthusiasm, others sharing hesitations. But the overall tone was respectful and thoughtful. When it was time to vote, ballots were distributed. Ben's heart pounded as the votes were collected and tallied. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the chair stood again and announced the results. The proposal for the dog park has passed with a clear majority, she said. Ben felt a surge of relief and joy. Nancy's hand rose slowly. She marked her vote. No, with deliberate care. Ben caught her eye and nodded respectfully. The chair continued. While some concerns remain, the community's voice is clear. We will move forward with planning and implementation. Applause broke out, some warm, some hesitant. Ben returned to his seat, heart still racing but proud. He glanced around at the neighbors, smiling, chatting, and sharing quiet congratulations. This wasn't just a win for Milo or for himself. It was a win for the whole neighborhood. As the meeting wrapped up, Nancy approached him. Mr. Thompson, she said, voice softer than before. I hope this project brings the harmony you envision. I'll be watching closely. Ben smiled. Thank you, Nancy. I'm sure Milo will appreciate your attention. They shared a brief nod to neighbors who had crossed a line from polite distance toward cautious understanding. Outside, the evening stars blinked awake as Ben walked home. Already imagining the dog park's first day, Milo greeted him at the door, tail wagging as if he knew a new adventure was beginning. The morning sunlight spilled warmly over Maple Hollow as Ben stepped outside, a sense of accomplishment in his stride. The dog park project had officially been approved, and today was the first day of construction. Milo bounced eagerly beside him, as if sensing that something exciting was about to happen. The empty lot next to Nancy's house no longer looked forgotten. A small crew had already arrived, setting up orange cones and rolling out fencing materials. The scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the faint aroma of paint and new wood. Ben felt a rush of pride as neighbors began to gather, some with dogs. In tow, others with coffee cups in hand, ready to watch the neighborhood take shape. Cheryl was there early, handing out homemade cookies. This is really happening, she said with a grin. I'm so glad you pushed for this, Ben. Ben smiled. It's all of us. Everyone who signed the petition helped make this real. From across the street, Nancy watched quietly from her porch. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes tracked every movement with careful interest as the workers began putting up the fencing. Ben took a moment to walk the perimeter with Milo. The ground was uneven, scattered with small stones, but the space was perfect. wide enough for dogs to sprint and play, yet contained enough to feel safe. "This is your kingdom soon, buddy," Ben said, ruffling Milo's fur. Throughout the day, neighbors stopped by to offer help. Some brought water bowls and toys, others volunteered to paint signs or clear brush. The energy was contagious, and Ben found himself caught up in the excitement. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Mid-morning, few residents approached Ben with concerns. One neighbor mentioned the added noise and how it might disturb their afternoon naps. Another worried about parking during busy times. Ben listened carefully, thanking them for their honesty and promising to bring their concerns to the next association. Meeting Nancy, too, made her way over once the workers paused for lunch. She approached Ben with a small envelope. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I want to contribute something to the park. Something that might help it feel ... more a part of Maple Hollow." Ben accepted the envelope, surprised. Inside was a check and a neatly written note for the community. "From one who cares deeply. Thank you, Nancy. That means a lot," Ben said sincerely. She nodded briefly and walked back toward her house, leaving Ben to wonder if this was the start of something new between them. By late afternoon, the fencing was mostly up. The framework of gates and signs began to define the space. Milo darted in and out, his golden fur a blur of happiness as he chased a tennis ball thrown by one of the kids. Ben stood back and watched the transformation. The lot no longer empty or forgotten, but alive with possibility. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ben sent a quick message to the neighborhood group chat. "Day 1 done. Thanks to everyone who showed up. Tomorrow we start planning, landscaping, and benches." Milo says, "Woof." Responses popped up quickly, filled with enthusiasm and ideas. Later, on his porch with Milo resting his head on his knee, Ben reflected on the day. The journey was just beginning, but already the park was becoming more than just a playset. Was becoming a symbol of connection, patience, and new friendships. Days passed and the dog park took shape. Fences stood tall, gates swung open for the first time, and freshly painted signs proclaimed the Space Maple Hollow Dog Park. The neighborhood was buzzing with excitement, and Milo was its happiest. Resident Ben had expected some resistance, but what surprised him most was the way the project was bringing people together. Neighbors who barely spoke before were now chatting over fences, sharing dog stories, and laughing at Milo's playful antics. Nancy, once the voice of quiet opposition, was now showing up with a subtle but steady presence. She didn't join the boisterous conversations or the weekend cleanup crews, but she walked her own small terrier through the park each morning, her pace steady, eyes calm. One bright Saturday, Ben found Nancy sitting on a newly installed bench, quietly watching her dog sniff the freshly planted flowers. "Good morning, Nancy," Ben said, approaching with Milo trotting beside him. She glanced up, a small smile touching her lips. "Good morning, Ben. The park looks quite lovely." "Thanks," he replied, settling down on the bench a respectful distance away. "I didn't expect this project to change so much so quickly." Nancy nodded. Change is difficult, but sometimes it brings unexpected gifts. Ben looked out at the park. Dogs darted back and forth, children laughed, and neighbors shared stories on blankets spread under young trees. "You know, I wasn't sure about this at first," Nancy continued. "I worried about noise and disruption. But seeing the park in use, it's different. It feels like a place where the neighborhood breathes." Ben smiled. "I'm glad you feel that way. Milo is thrilled too." Nancy's eyes softened. "He's a fine dog. I admit I was mistaken to judge him from a letter." Ben chuckled. "Letters don't tell the whole story." For the first time, the conversation felt genuine and warm. Nancy shared a bit about her life, a love of gardening, the peace she found in routine, and her late husband's passion for community projects. Ben listened, sharing stories of his own move to Maple Hollow and his hopes for building more than just a home. As they talked, their dogs approached, tails wagging, noses sniffing. Milo and Nancy's terrier circled each other, then settled side by side on the grass. The scene was simple but meaningful. To neighbors, once divided by suspicion, now finding common ground through a shared space and a love for their pets. Word of their newfound rapport spread quietly. Other neighbors noticed Nancy's softer presence, her willingness to listen and even join casual conversations. One afternoon, Cheryl stopped by Ben's house, a knowing smile on her face. "Looks like you've cracked Nancy's shell," she teased. Ben laughed. "It's a start. I think we both learned a lot." The dog park became a meeting point, not just for pets, but for people where differences faded and friendship grew. Ben realized that the heart of the neighborhood wasn't just the houses or the lawns, but the connections forged over shared experiences and small acts of kindness. And for Milo, every visit was a celebration, a reminder that sometimes the best adventures happen right next door. Spring settled softly over Maple Hollow, painting the neighborhood in fresh greens and bright blooms. The dog park was no longer just a new addition. It had become a vibrant gathering place, full of laughter, wagging tails, and easy conversations. Ben stood by the gate one sunny afternoon, Milo by his side, watching his neighbors arrive with their dogs. The air was filled with the sounds of playful barking, cheerful greetings, and the occasional clink of water bowls. It was the kind of scene that made Ben smile without needing any words. Nearby, Nancy was chatting quietly with Cheryl, her terrier resting contentedly at her feet. The change in Nancy was undeniable. She moved with a calm confidence, her earlier reservations softened by the warmth of the community she had once kept at arm's length. Ben thought back to the first time he had met her, the polite but firm message about his dog, the distance that had seemed unbridgeable. Now they shared more than just the neighborhood. They shared moments of kindness and understanding that made the place truly feel like home. As Ben watched, Milo bounded over, two Nancy's terrier tails wagging in joyful greeting. Nancy smiled and gave Milo a gentle scratch behind the ears. "Looks like Milo has made quite the impression," she said. Ben laughed. "He's got away with everyone." Nancy's gaze softened. "I'm glad we found a way through." Ben nodded. "Me too. It's funny how a little space for dogs turned into something much bigger." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of children laughing, chasing each other near the new picnic tables. Ben spotted a group of neighbors setting up for the upcoming community potluck, a tradition they had revived since the park's opening. The dog park had become a catalyst for change. It's been inspiring neighbors to reconnect, share meals, and celebrate together. What began as a simple petition had blossomed into a deeper sense of belonging. Ben thought about how much had shifted, not just the physical space, but the hearts of the people around him. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ben sat on his porch with Milo curled at his feet. The neighborhood was quiet now, the day's energy settling into peaceful contentment. His phone buzzed with a message from Nancy. "Thank you for your patience and persistence. Maple Hollow is better for it." Ben smiled, typing back, "Here's to new beginnings and good neighbors." He looked down at Milo, whose eyes reflected the soft glow of the porch light. "We did it, buddy," Ben said quietly. "A new chapter for all of us." And as the stars twinkled overhead, the neighborhood, once divided by doubts and distance, stood united, bound by community, compassion, and the simple joy of a dog park that had brought them all a little closer.